Okay, we're here with Dr. Michael Lennox today, and we're going to be talking about Black Moon Lilith. But first, I want to start off by just sharing a few things with you in regards to Michael Lennox, okay? So, Dr. Michael Lennox has been seen internationally on many television shows, the Sci Fi Network called The Dream Team, which I love. We have the NBC's Emmy Award winning Starting Over, Soap Talk, and many other television shows. Okay. You also have a master's degree and a doctorate in psychology, which I think is brilliant with astrology, actually. And you're the author of 2 books, the Dream Site book, yep, and Llewellyn's Complete Dream Dictionary. Not only that, you can find Michael teaching astrology courses. He does have a dream circle. He does astrology personal readings that you can sign up for on michaellennox.com. And one of my personal favorite classes that he's taught is the voice class, which is coming up right away. So sign up for that one because it's like very insightful and very transformational on so many levels. So please sign up for that one. So let's begin, Michael, with talking about Black Moon Lilith and what it actually is in the astrology chart.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for that lovely introduction. I forgot that my whole career started out in television 25 years ago. I thought I was going to become a famous TV star. It didn't happen that way,
Well,
which we're all better off. That Dr. Michael would have been in rehab 3 times over. I was not ready for that at the time. So yes, Black Moon. First of all, I love that you reached out and wanted to talk to me about Black Moon Lilith, or wanted to talk to your people about Black Moon Lilith through a conversation with me, because I too love this point. I love it in charts. I love it in transit, and it's an esoteric aspect of astrology, so it's not widely known.
Yeah, it's wild, but not.
It's wild. It is for sure wild. So let's just give a brief description. First and foremost, Black Moon and Black Moon Lilith. I don't know why Western astrology added Lilith to a concept of Black Moon, but I'm going to start with just the Black Moon concept. There's also something called the Dark Moon, which is not Black Moon Lilith, just in case anybody's out there looking for other, esoteric astrology sort of points. Black Moon Lilith starts with the notion that there's a point in space that's related to the moon's orbit around the Earth that's in between the Earth and the moon. So the moon represents our access to the unconscious, which is arguably the much greater aspect of ourselves. We think of ourselves as these consciously aware beings, and that is reflected in astrology by the burning bright sun at the center. So the sun burning says, I'm all this. The moon, meanwhile, is up there going, oh, yeah, honey, I think you think you're all that, but I have the unconscious, and it's behind me. And it's all of outer space. That's how big the unconscious is. And the moon is our astrological sort of connection to everything that's unconscious. And in my world, the unconscious includes, it's a word used in psychology to describe the unknown territory psychologically below the surface, but it's also where imagination comes from, inspiration comes from, our connection to spirit comes from, the unknown unconscious. So Black Moon isn't part of the unconscious in regard to the big, vast outer space version of the unconscious. It's inside the moon's orbit. So it's like things in the unconscious that we are tripping on because they're bubbling up out of the surface from below, or by the same sort of description, things we try to repress and push down into the unconscious. And we're like, oh, I don't want to be that person. That's a Black Moon thing. So what the point is itself inside the moon's orbit is if you think that the moon just spins around the earth in a perfect circle, that's not how it works. It's a very dynamic system where the earth and the moon pull on each other. This is why they have this thing called the supermoon. Like the supermoon just means that the moon is full and also close to the earth, because the moon moves close and far away, close and far away. That creates like a wobble of the energy between the earth as the moon is wobbling towards the earth and wobbling away from the earth. And if you measure that wobble, it has a consistency that we call black moon. And this point, relative from us here on the earth, if we were calculating this and looking up into space, this point would move 30 degrees, which is one sign, in 9 months. I think that's interesting because we have a gestational period of 9 months, right? So let's put that on a shelf for a second, because that's going to count into our conversation about Black Moon. So if Black Moon is about material that we're tripping on because it's coming up out of the unconscious and we can't help it, because Lilith was added to this point as a kind of an archetypal namesake, now we have to consider that Lilith's energy is part of this Black Moon experience. And who is Lilith? Well, Lilith was the first woman in the Canaanite origin story, where Adam and Lilith were made in equal stead, both out of the same dust, and so they were equal in power. Lilith was strong, sovereign. She would not submit. There was the Israelite origin story where Adam is made first, and then comes Eve, subservient, made from his rib. So at a certain point in the formation of the Old Testament, that Lilith story was discarded, as was Lilith. She was demonized. Because she was sexually sovereign, she was cast as a sexual deviant, who was dangerous, who was, she ate children in some tellings of the story. Like she's right. And all of this is just a patriarchal rejection of the powerful feminine aspect that is both creative and destructive. Like they know this in the East. You've got Kali is a perfect example of the goddess who is both creative and destructive. We don't readily accept that in the West. It's a patriarchal system. So I wish I knew why and when Black Moon and Lilith were joined in Western astrology. So I can't speak to that, but it did occur. So now we have a point that's inside the moon's orbit that represents material that is undeniably going to trip us up because it's bubbling out from the surface below, that also includes how we relate to our shame and our sexuality. So now sexuality becomes a part of this power, that if we repress our sexuality, if we're afraid of it, if we try to shove that into the unconscious, then we're disconnected, not operating fully and in integration. Black Moon Lilith allows us to incorporate that juicy, rich sexual energy that is both creative and destructive and powerfully feminine in nature. So it's a juicy point in a chart because it represents how a person relates to material that's coming out of their unconscious and their sexuality, and points of repression that need to be freed up. And then by transit, that is Black Moon Lilith moving around, we can have an understanding about what's happening on the planet at the current moment with regard to, I don't mind saying it this way, our mandate to topple the patriarchy and to lift up the divine feminine that's been lost. And that is also reflected by Black Moon Lilith. So there's your little astrological 411 about what it is.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot.
And, especially during this time right now, I wonder, the healing that's going on, right, between the masculine and the feminine, the patriarch. and that this whole concept of the feminine rising is affecting sort of this healing process right now on the planet. I mean,
Yes.
is this coming into full play? Because it feels like that it is, you know, in my world even, it's not something I would say that when I was younger, I very much was more like a sort of wallflower. I wouldn't
Ah.
disrupt, I wouldn't, you know, speak my opinion about things that I saw were, you know, these kinds of things. But like I wasn't standing in that sort of full power in myself. But I wonder how this point in your chart can actually help you identify where it is you're sort of unconsciously playing out or not stepping into, you know, more of what could benefit your healing and the healing of the planet.
Well, I think that that is one of the juicy things that is available when we start using the chart to contextualize who we are,
Mhm.
right? And so we all look to our sun sign to kind of understand, well, what's my personality makeup? We look to our moon sign to understand, well, how's my inner life described, right? And the rising sign, the ascendant, you know, is we use that sign. And I think people who are learning more about astrology, one of the first things that someone, even at the beginning of astrology, can begin to do is understand that if you understand that your sun sign reflects you because the sun represents your integrating consciousness or personality, that if I tell you that Black Moon Lilith describes how you relate to tripping on your unconscious and learning from it, then the quality of the sign will describe that for you. So someone will say to me, well, what does that mean for me? As if I can give you the answer. But it's like more like, well, you tell me. Like if I tell you that your Black Moon Lilith is in, you know, Cancer, and Cancer is the sign that rules, you know, tender emotions, vulnerability, and sensitivity, things that relate to home and hearth and mothers. You might then say things to me about the experience you have of your deep unconscious trippings. And then you get to say, oh, I can make some sense out of knowing that my Black Moon Lilith sign is this or that, and that begins the inquiry. But it's really important, if any of you listening are going to do that, to not think of that as something that an astrologer has to tell you what it means. You tell the astrologer what it means by thinking about this idea of your unconscious sort of manhole cover that sometimes overflows, or like your toilet that you flush your poop away with every once in a while won't flush the poop away.
Yeah.
Right? We get the plunger out and we're embarrassed and we feel ashamed.
And
Well,
so,
that's a Black Moon Lilith thing. Like our poopy smell erupts into the area. We've got to clean it up while feeling ashamed. So if that's what Black Moon Lilith is, your job is to take that idea, imagine how that lives inside of you, and then use the sign that your Black Moon Lilith is in when you were born to wonder about that.
right. So it's not the sun sign, it's not the ascendant sign, and it's not the moon sign. It's inside the astrology chart in a particular sign or house.
That's right.
And
And you can find this out, kids.
yes.
One of the easiest ways, there's a website out there called astrolibrary.com, just ASTRO, the word library.com. They have wonderful calculators for different planet placements and point placements where you just click on it, you give your birth information, and the system will tell you exactly where your Black Moon Lilith is. And you can get that in about 45 seconds online. And this then begins your inquiry.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So does it affect men and women differently? I mean, men also have Black Moon.
That's right.
Okay.
This is a great question, which I got to tell you, my initial answer has to be, well, I don't know, Allison. It's a great question, but I've not looked at it, so I can't answer authoritatively of like, well, yes, and this is what I've seen, because I haven't looked at it. I will say this,
What might you
in a
think?
very generalized way, women are more likely to understand how to work with their Black Moon Lilith because they are, again, generalized statement here, more likely to be easily oriented to understanding their inner life, where men are acculturated away from understanding their inner life as a function of being productive in the world.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But both men and women are going to have the same reflection of shame, repression, powerful, creative, feminine principle when it's integrated, and a relationship to their sexuality, whether they're male, female, biologically one or the other, because it's a human experience to have an unconscious and a. But I do think that men in general have a harder work on all of this self-actualization thing, and it's certainly being reflected culturally right now, where in this mainstream idea of men and women and dating and sovereignty and roles has become this crazy little thing in the zeitgeist.
Oh, very intense, actually. I find tremendous amount of miscommunication between sexes right now, and very little communication about actually what is occurring. And but that's a whole other.
That's a whole other. It's a whole other video or audio.
Take for example, Capricorn. Like if you have a Black Moon Lilith in Capricorn, let's say, what?
Okay, so one of the things we might do with that, right, is you take a look at the sign Capricorn. So we know that it's an earth sign. So earth signs are less emotional, they say, than water signs. They're less intellectual than air signs. They're less change oriented than fire signs. So earth signs are about the grounded aspects of being in a body. Capricorn happens to be the sign ruled by Saturn, the teacher. So then someone with Black Moon Lilith in Capricorn is going to have a little more serious and intense demand to take a look at their inner repression things, because Capricorn is a sign that demands that you climb up to the top of that mountain. That goat is climbing the mountain for a reason that isn't often talked about when we think about Capricorn and goals. You know, Capricorn is the goal sign, but it's also the sign of vantage point to see farther. It's a deeply spiritual and wisdom-oriented drive that goat has. He's climbing the top of the mountain so that he can see more clearly from a consciousness perspective. So someone with Black Moon Lilith in Capricorn might be more driven to do their inner work, because that drive, that goal is like, you would take the self-investigatory sensibility of Black Moon Lilith and add the sign sensation of, I feel compelled to get to the bottom of these wounded spaces so that I can know who I am from a higher vantage point.
I mean, and part of that could be, you know, maybe a darker element of that.
Oh, sure.
Right? Of like, you know, domination and sort of, I mean, what?
No, I love where you're going. I get it, because control,
yeah,
and struggle and domination and submission is in the Capricorn wheelhouse. So if somebody is moving through the world and their shameful sexual places includes some domination consciousness, ain't nothing wrong with that in the bedroom if it's consensual and powerful and everybody is sort of in agreement that we're playing this out. But when it's unconscious and it's problematic, then Black Moon Lilith and Capricorn will say, here's what's going on. If you're not paying attention, these power struggles might take you down in intimate relationship, as opposed to being integrated and valuable to be like, I'm ready to share my yummy spaces because I've looked at them. So that can be a function of, say, as your example, Black Moon Lilith in Capricorn. I have Black Moon Lilith in Scorpio, and conjunct my Neptune in Scorpio. Neptune is a planet that relates to our spiritual connection, but it's also got the shadow artifact of addiction and escapism. Addiction was a big part of my story, especially earlier in my life. So having Black Moon Lilith conjunct my Neptune in Scorpio, when I learned about this, I was like, oh my God, that's why my addiction has taken me into like public humiliation experiences, because my shame and repressed places earlier in my life joined in with my addictive tendencies, and there it is in my chart.
Interesting.
So that became a way I could assess my journey, see a reflection of a struggle that I had, and it helped me remove the judgment or the self-imposed sort of shame of the struggles that I had with my addiction. It's more like, no, there it is. It was just in the mix. Your job to work with and transform, and here I am at 59. We're on the other side of that.
Right. Yeah.
But the Black Moon Lilith reflected the journey.
Yeah. And that judgment, like you're saying, it's like when you hold that judgment inside yourself, it can't move. The energy can't move. So it's like moving through that piece like you're talking about. I was curious actually about, okay, so if you have Black Moon Lilith in a particular area of your chart, does it affect conversely the opposite angle? Like,
well, that's
like
always
South Node. Do you know what I'm saying?
always, yeah, always in astrology, there is an implied polarity consciousness. The North Node and the South Node of the moon are actually a perfect example of this, where there's literally a point in one sign and a point in its opposite sign. That because the South Node is you cannot separate the South Node from the North Node.
Yeah.
It's the same energy. One is facing backwards, one is facing forward.
The South Node being
that,
past and the North Node being
is the future.
Yeah.
All placements then have built into them some sense of what the opposite sign sort of either means or brings to the mix. In a generalized way that astrology works with something called the dignities, which is how a planet is either in rulership or in detriment or fall. Like, these are just descriptive words that say a planet is either happy in a sign or unhappy in a sign. And one of the things that's like a rule in astrology is that whatever sign a planet is ruled by, its opposite sign is its detriment sign. So there's something built into every opposition that kind of says, if I have a problem in this sign, its solution is in the opposite sign. So I just use my own chart as an example. Scorpio, Black Moon Lilith does mean that my repressed, shameful, juicy areas are going to be deep. Scorpio are going to connect to addiction near my Neptune. And what's the solution? Grounded connection to love and safety in the moment, Taurus. Taurus is the sign opposite of Scorpio.
Right. Yep.
So that there is a way of looking, well, what's the sign opposite is going to give you some clues about how to take a struggle in a particular sign and somehow come to a balance with it by considering what the opposite sign is. Now, of course, what house Black Moon Lilith falls into in a chart is also telling.
Okay.
Right? So mine is 11th house, which is a public house. The 11th house is the house of community. And I used to laugh, well, ha, ha, ha. I can laugh now, but I used to joke that I never learned anything about humility that didn't come through humiliation.
Whoa,
That's an 11th house Black Moon Lilith thing, because 11th house is public. My repressed, shameful point is public. And I indeed, had many experiences as I was struggling with behaviors that didn't serve me. They were almost always experiences that got me caught in public. This is why we're glad that TV show didn't take off in 2003, because I wasn't done with my inner work.
right.
I was still tripping on my shadow 20 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
And it would have been a very public display. I'm telling you, that Dr. Michael would have been in rehab, and publicly so.
Yeah. So it's like, so those are particular areas you can look actually in the chart to sort of investigate for yourself what it is where that shame or guilt or, society.
Or valuable exploration of sexuality might be, yes. So shame, guilt, tripping up, and your relationship to powerful sexual energy.
Yeah.
Someone with Black Moon Lilith in their second house, which is the house of values and what I desire and the cash and prizes, that person had better explore their sexuality in a rich and transparent way, because it's energetically important. Anything in the second house is about, well, this is important to me. Right. And, the 7th house is about relationship. That means that relationships are going to be the source of tripping on yourself, integrating and learning as you go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, yeah, because it's like a point in the chart. It's not a planet. And so it's, how much weight does it hold in the chart? And one other question I actually want to ask before I forget is there any past life sort of connection there?
Golly, what an interesting question. Let me say this, as you ask that question, the thing in astrology that's most connected to past lives are the nodes of the moon, because they are the south node, which is our past, would also be considered your doorway into this life. I like to say the south node is your breath in when you're born, and the north node is your breath out when you die. And that all of life is just one breath, right? So if the nodes of the moon, which are connected to the moon, determine what your past life experience might be, then Black Moon Lilith, as connecting to the moon, might, and I'm just saying this out loud as I'm speaking, I'm just sort of making this up as I go, one might be able to make the argument that your Black Moon Lilith struggle is something that you bring in with you from a past life. And the reason why I'm saying this in a way that I can be like, I can back this up, is because they both connect to the moon.
Yes. Okay.
So the
yeah.
placement of everything and your control over your first breath will say, where's Black Moon going to fall? What house in the chart Black Moon Lilith is going to fall in is very different if you take your first breath at 2 p.m. than if you take it at 5:30.
Yeah. That's so fascinating, because I was looking at my own placements in my own chart, and I was kind of considering, like, stuff I know about my own past life and what I've kind of brought in, and that being like a piece of it. It really feels like a piece of what I'm processing. And it's really interesting now because I think it always was affecting me in my lifetime, my younger years, but I didn't see it. I didn't quite catch it. I didn't see it. But now that I've become so much more aware with my studies with astrology and, all my healing work and stuff that I've done, it's much more clear. And now that I've been looking at this aspect of my chart, it's like, wow, okay, I can see the connections, like the puzzle pieces.
That's right. Well, you're also speaking into what what I have to talk about all the time is that chronology counts. It takes time for us to learn and grow and heal and integrate. So
Yeah.
it is true and accurate that there comes a point in our life, if we've been doing the work, that it starts paying off for us. And for my money, that doesn't happen until you're at least into your 40s and
Yeah.
beyond.
But hey,
That was
I
what I
say
was
to
doing.
any younger younger people who are watching this, if you can start to look at those aspects of your chart, it will alleviate maybe some pain.
I agree. I agree. Plus, not for nothing, Allie, you and I are similar in age, and there are the younger people who were born long after us, who are in their teens and 20s and maybe even early 30s. They came in more integrated than we did, just because of time and chronology.
Mhm,
You
mhm.
know,
Right. Yeah.
the other thing that's fascinating to talk about with a Black Moon Lilith is what sign she's in and what's happening on the planet. One of the reasons why I got more interested in pushing my wisdom about Black Moon Lilith into the world more started in 2020, when we were in the midst of craziness after pandemic shut us all down, and then things started to explode in Me Too and racial justice, and Black Moon Lilith was in Aries during that time. So Black Moon Lilith also represents what's bubbling up out of the surface of the collective shadow consciousness.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the world kind of muted itself with the pandemic. And one of the things that happened, well, people went insane on a personal level, and unbalanced people got squeezed. Sorry, and some of them got videoed when they did that, and that's too bad. And some of them were blonde women named Karen, and that created a whole trope. But on a productive level, the world's capacity to go into below the surface, churning unconscious spaces and find some power there was in the sign of angry, startup, fiery, kick-ass Aries.
Mhm.
And that's part of what helped the Me Too movement to advance and the racial justice movement to coalesce, because during that period, our unconscious bubbly material that we're talking about with Black Moon Lilith was in the fiery sort of sign of Aries. In 2021, at some point that he moved in, whatever. I'd like to gender the planets, and I probably have to stop that because of the new landscape.
I think it's okay.
Listen, 20 years ago, people were saying to me, oh, I love that you gender the planets. And now they're saying to me, do you have to gender the planets? Anyway, that's, again, another video or another conversation.
So what
But
about all that's going on for women right now on this planet? The intense abuse that is occurring globally in macro and micro ways on this planet.
keeping the conversation, because that's a juicy question, but keeping it in the lens of this conversation that we are having, 2022 featured Black Moon Lilith moving into Cancer in the spring, and she's just about over. In fact, on January 9th, she changes signs and moves into Leo. But for the last 9 months, the sign that Black Moon's been in has been deeply personal and intimate. Cancer is not extroverted, and it's not about work out there in the world. It's about turning within. I think it's interesting that in 2021, this conversation about men and women and dating, and we don't need you anymore, and the men are intimidated, the women are figuring it all out, that's Black Moon Lilith in Cancer. That's, I go into the spaces of Cancer, which is, how am I caring for self? Where are my needs getting met? Women are saying, I don't need men for those needs. I'm fulfilling those myself.
Well, that's interesting though. The other, I just want to angle this a little bit, because what I've experienced, if I'm a woman who actually values the connection with men and actually see them as part of the world and my connection, and that, you know, I'm not pushing them out of my field unless it's abusive, of course. But I find a very strange thing kind of happens. It's like men start to feel like, oh, you need me, huh? Like it becomes like this ego driven thing. It's a very strange thing that's going on because different women, like I know what you're saying, because a lot of women are, I don't need men. I'm, you know, got full force in my career. I've got, you know, like I don't need, you know, a man to fulfill me. And I get that we don't need someone to fulfill us, but you know, there is, in connection with each other, there is a healing that takes place as well.
Well, what I love about this exchange, I just said something about my experience and you just countered with yours. And what's beautiful about this is that my experience is specifically because my only relationship to this concept is me looking at social media and seeing what certain women and men are saying. You, as a woman in a body that's heterosexually oriented, then you're having, but both experiences, whether we're talking about my observation or your personal experience, is a healing.
Yeah.
And that this year it's been about the healing. Cancer says, go home, mommy will kiss your boo-boo so that you can go out there and climb that. Back to, by the way, the opposites. Cancer says, go home and mommy will kiss the boo-boo. But why? Capricorn is the opposite sign. So you can go back out there and climb up the mountain of your desires. So for you, it's been more of an inner healing of your own relationship to this idea. And when Black Moon Lilith moves into Leo next year, that's an extroverted sign. It's a sign of leadership. It will be very interesting to see what happens in your personal experience of like processing your healing, because we move from inner healing, mommy kisses the boo-boo, to powerfully in the world seeking creative expression, Leo. And I think we'll see a shift in the timbre of the movements that are out there, because I think Black Moon Lilith and movements like peace movements and women's movements, I think they're related because they both connect to unconscious material that we struggle with, that as we heal it, we get bigger, better in all ways. And so there'll be a shift in dynamic when we move into late January and Black Moon Lilith has changed signs.
Is there a sign, if Black Moon Lilith is in a particular sign that would represent maybe like narcissism? Would there be?
Leo.
Huh.
Leo. Great thing. Oh shit. Put that in. Now, here's the last sort of thing we can talk about with regard to transiting Black Moon Lilith, which is, since Black Moon Lilith is going into Leo, and Leo is in fact the sign, if you look at the shadow of Leo, it invented narcissism, grandiosity, and arrogance. So that quality is a quality that Black Moon Lilith is going to say, if you have that in you, you need to pull it out of the unconscious, which we will do for you. And that's what Black Moon Lilith says. She's going to pull narcissism, grandiosity, and arrogance out of your unconscious if you have it in there to trip on.
Which sign are we going into?
Leo.
Leo. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, Cancer comes first, then Leo next. And so that change happens in the second week of January. Now, I have a Leo Sun and a Leo Venus, very end of the sign. So when Black Moon Lilith is transiting my Venus and my Sun, there might be things that I go through that allow me to integrate my sense of self, because the Sun is the self, by facing certain disowned shadow material that perhaps I haven't faced yet. So if that changeover happens in like October, that means that Black Moon Lilith will be passing over my Leo Sun at the end of September. That will be an interesting thing for me to consider that as I move into the fall of this year, I might bump into some arrogance, grandiosity, and other sort of shadowy challenges. And being a Leo sun, I have some of those, right? So that's something else to do when you go to astrolibrary.com and you figure out where your Black Moon Lilith is. You might go to the same program or get a copy of your chart somewhere just to see what house in your chart is ruled by Leo, because that area of your consciousness might get a little bit of shadow material kicked up during the year. And if you have any Leo planet placements, the consciousness of that planet means shadow material will get kicked up. So if it's Venus in Leo, it would be about love and intimacy. If it's Mercury in Leo, it would be about communication. So yes, clocking where Leo is will help you with your Black Moon Lilith experience of transiting Black Lilith next year.
Okay, that's quite interesting, because I think that will help everybody sort of what are practices we can put into place that would actually alleviate, right, some of those aspects that are that shadowy stuff that we have to look at. And, I mean, meditation, energy healing work, there are a lot of things too that can help besides just, right?
Absolutely. I think what you're speaking to for me is like maintaining the quality of your instrument. The instrument, for me is your body. And so that having a meditation practice is key, because the mind is where all of this consideration happens. And if you're still stuck in chaotic thoughts and haven't cultivated spaciousness from the neck up, which meditation helps generate, it's difficult to do the fine-tuned work. So yeah, I would say that your job in that regard to mitigate challenge, because you can't tell the unconscious not to throw something that's unconscious up on your path. It's like nothing's going to stop that.
Yeah.
Because it's unconscious. I remember, so many times I'd have conversations with people about this, and they'd be like, well, I don't feel that way. And it's like, I did say the word unconscious, did I not? So you cannot prepare or protect yourself from something that is not known to you that you're going to trip on. So this is important, because you can't mitigate against that. But this is where keeping your embodiment as clean as possible will help you understand when you're being hit by something that's shadow material, or when somebody's really just done something shitty and you need to process it. Shadow materials when it's like triggered inside of you and the reaction is bigger than the circumstance merits. You're probably in some shadow work, and Black Moon Lilith might be reflecting that.
And two, it's like, I think understanding that we have like a collective thought pattern. There's collective thought patterns in the world that are going on that we're healing. So it's like questioning the mind. Is that really my thought?
Yeah.
Can I let that go?
Can I let that go? Yeah.
And being in nature and all these kinds of things will help. Oh my gosh. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we?
Well, I think what I would like to say is don't be afraid of this. One of the things that I sometimes will notice in people is they'll be like, well, if I learn this about my chart, I'll learn something about me that I don't want to know. And it's like, no. You already are this. You already know this. The learning more about your Black Moon Lilith placement isn't something to fear, because what it's reflecting, you already know. It's not going to tell you something you don't know about yourself. It's going to give you insight as to how and why you might be experiencing something a certain way, so that you can work with it more powerfully to create and generate your healing and your self-actualization. It's very powerful.
Well, please.
If you don't examine your shadow, that material will run your life from the unconscious. And that's what Black Moon Lilith is. At the end of the day, she's the arbiter of how much shadow we are able and willing to dance with at any given moment. Shadow work is scary, but if you don't grapple with those unconscious impulses, you will move through the world blindly and then blame the world for the things that you're creating over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely. Woo! Powerful stuff.
Power stuff. This was delightful, Allison. Thank you so much for inviting me to have this conversation with you.
Oh, this has been so wonderful. And you can look for Michael on his voice class that's coming up, because the voice class, I think, actually can help with some of this, integrate some of this. Actually.
Absolutely. It's called Finding Your Voice. And while I do talk about the voice from a physical and a resonance perspective, only in the first class, the rest of the class is shadow examinations of why, based on your childhood and family of origin, why the voice is less powerful. And then we talk about the voice, we're talking about boundaries, declarations, the ability to have a powerful yes and a powerful no, and use your voice to steward your life. I'm very excited. It starts on January 7th. So michaellennox.com for registration.
Awesome. Okay, you'll be seeing me again.
Hey, thank you, Allie.
Good to see you. Have a wonderful holiday.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, bye. And let's see here.